All right. I am very excited, guys, because God willing, we are going to be finishing the first chapter of Sukkah this evening. We are on Chaf Amud Beis 20b, and assuming we finish the first parak, we should be starting the second parak as well, because the second parak begins on the very same Amud. So previously, and by the way, I moved the microphone away a little bit to make space for my Gemara. Do you hear me well enough? Okay,
Yes.
Baruch Hashem. I turned up the gain on it, so it supposedly can absorb sound from more of a distance. I'm still playing around with it. One of these podcasting toys. Anyway, so what we talked about last time was that when you have these mats, right? We've been talking about this for a while. Covering your sukkah with a mat of reeds or a mat of different materials, which we'll delve into a little bit tonight. We said that it could be used if it's not mekabel tuma, if it's not susceptible to becoming tame. What makes it susceptible to becoming tame? If it's a kli. And then we had machlokis last time if the mats are not just susceptible to becoming tame mace, but also via tumas midras, we said, which are different things, people like kind of putting their weight and laying on it. So basically, if the mat is not just it doesn't just simply have a utility that would render it tame, but it's used to lay down on, it would make it susceptible even to tumas midras. That's what we dealt with last time. So we find ourselves 5 lines from the top of Chafam base, 5 lines from the top of 20b. It should, yeah, I would imagine it's still the first section in the art scroll. Amar Mar, Kol HaChotzalos. Okay, so just then again, Chotzalos has 2 different meanings depending who you go with. Either it's like the word machzeles, it refers to a mat, or it refers to some kind of like a bag. But we'll talk about that more soon. So first, we seem to have a bit of a contradiction from what we learned last time. Amar Mar, Kol HaChotzos mitamin tamei meis, Divrei Rabbi Dosa. So Rabbi Dosa told us that they are susceptible to becoming tamei meis, these mats. Vatanya in Hay Rabbi Dosa Omer Kidvarav. Rabbi Dosa agrees with what he says. Now, this is a quote from what we learned last week. Rashi is very helpful in case we don't remember what we learned last week and what this cryptic reference is being made to. Rashi fills this in. If you look at Rashi, the last wide line in Rashi in the top. Rabbi Dosa Omer Kidvarav Shel Rav Yossi Tezov Azov Mesachim Ba, that you can use these different kinds of woven mats to cover your sukkah. Alma lav klihu lekabel tuma. So Rabbi Dosa in one place says a mat is susceptible to becoming tame, and other place he says a mat is not susceptible to becoming tame. So how do we determine which is which? And for those joining us, we're on the top of 20b right now, on the top of Chaf Amud Beis. So then the difference is lo kashya had isle gedanfa had lesle gedanfa, and a gedanfa is Rashi tells us is kein safa saviv gava ma'at. It's basically a rim going around. So if there is a rim going around this mat, then it naturally turns it into more of a kli because it could actually be machzik. It could actually hold contents in it. So if it has a rim around it, it's makabel tuma. If it doesn't have a rim around it, it's not makabel tuma and can be used for schach. So says Rabbi Dosa, and that is our reconciliation within his own shita. Right, so it's always interesting to see. Sometimes we see in the Gemara many times that someone might appear to be self-contradictory. This happens all the time. What I've been doing, I'm not sure when I'm going to teach this at the shul. Maybe I'll do it for some 10:30 shiurim when I have to fill in. Maybe Shalashudas. I'm still figuring it out. But I started putting together a series on Igros Moshe, on Moshe Feinstein's Chuvos. And part of what's interesting about analyzing it is that it's interesting to see where Rav Moshe seems to contradict himself between one tshuva and another tshuva, and figuring out how to reconcile those. I'll give you one example to whet your appetite. So I'll be at a Pidyon Haben this Sunday, God willing. Zadie, I think you're there too, right?
Pardon?
You're at a Pidyon Haben this Sunday also, right?
You bet. I'm
You're
the
the Kohen, so I sure hope so. God willing. So Ramoshe Feinstein.
I'm gonna sell a kid.
Yeah, exactly. So, so Rav Moshe
I
Feinstein,
hope the government doesn't get after me.
yeah, and there's taxes after that. So Rav Moshe Feinstein says that Rav Moshe Feinstein says that if you don't schedule it properly, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically it has to be on the 30th day. So there's a machlokes shach and magi and Avraham. Does it mean literally 30 days, or I'm forgetting the precise number, but the moon, it doesn't actually take 30 days for the moon to go through a full cycle. It really takes 29 days and a half plus what's it, Tafshin Sadi Gimel Chalakim, something like that. So it's actually a little bit less than that. But basically, what happens if you could only rely on one sheet and not the other? So he says, because of Kavod Habrios, because they invited everyone already and everyone marked off their calendar and they're all coming, you can leave it at the original time scheduled because of Kavod Habrios, because of human dignity. Now, what's interesting is Ramosha, in another tshuva, completely nothing to do with it, he talks about Hilchos Nida and Harchakos, and that when a man and woman, so when they're married, so when the woman is a Nida, they're not supposed to pass things directly from hand to hand. But there's a question that was brought to him, which was the couple was at a meal and she felt embarrassed keeping her chakos in front of people because then she's basically telling everyone that she's a nida. So he says that's not an issue of kavod habrios. Everyone knows that women menstruate. Everyone knows that at some point, for roughly 2 weeks or so, a little bit less, hopefully, they'll have to keep our chakos. Like he says, basically, your busha is not justified. So I thought it was very interesting. Two seemingly unrelated shuvos. One place where Moshe thinks kavod habrios is legitimate. One place he thinks it isn't. And how do we resolve what, for a moment, seems like contradictions within Rav Moshe? So this is something we do all the time. Anyway, I went on a bit of a tangent just to put that on your radar. And if you are interested in Shiurim on Igros Moshe, let me know, and I'll try to figure out what the proper slot is for them. Okay. Anyway, moving forward, Meisvei. So we have a contradiction from a brisa. So okay, there's going to be all these different kinds of materials that we're going to discuss. Chotzalos shel, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Sha'am v'shel gemi v'shel sak v'shel sapira. So what are all these different things? So sha'am and gemi are some kind of thing that grows by the riverside, as we've seen in the past. Does our scroll give a proper translation of what they are? I'm just curious. Because Rashi tells us.
It says it's a rush plant, is all how it describes it.
See, I don't even know what a brush.
Rush, R-U-S-H.
I remember that they grow somewhere near the river, I believe. Okay, so some kind of plant. That's the point. These are plants. Vishel sak, vishel sapira. So sak, I believe, is from goats. Rashi says, and sapira, Rashi says, is a hair that's taken mitzavar hasus umiznavo, from the neck and from the tail of a horse. Okay, so these are basically hairs from animals. So let's say you make mats out of these materials. Mitame tame mace. They are susceptible to tumas mace. Divi Rabbi Dosa. The Chachamim omrim af midras, and the Chachamim say even tumas midras they are susceptible to. Okay, this sounds familiar. This is the same machlokes we had last time. The Chachamim basically believe that these materials could be used even for laying down. If they're used for people to lay down and to recline on, then they are susceptible even for tumas midras. Okay. Now we're going to ask the following question. The question actually has nothing to do with the machlokes or Dosa Chachamim. The point we just need to know from there is that both the Chachamim and Rabbi Dosa, whether it doesn't matter what degree of Tumah, the point is they agree that all these materials are susceptible at very least to Tumas Mace. But the question we're going to ask now is, some of these materials aren't so obvious to us that they should become susceptible to Tumah in the first place. Bishlam Amanda Amar Mar Zubli. So some sort of bag or sacket. So if it's made from these brush materials, then they can hold fruit. So then I can understand how they are makabel tuma. They're kalim. They can hold fruit in them. And if they're made from these animal hairs, then they can be used for different kinds of pouches. But Elmad Amar Machatzos Mamish, but according to those who translate the word chutzalos as machatzalos, as mats, then how do I make sense of all these materials being susceptible to tama? So when it comes to these animal hides, animal hairs, they could be used for covering things. They could be used for sieving things, for filtering things. But these reeds is not the right word. But these plants, what can they be used for? Chazu liniziasa. So what is liniziasa? So Rashi tells us. Where is Rashi? It's further down. Okay. So it's used to basically cover the vats that they make the beer in. So it has a function. So the point is, all these things cover something, they have some function, and so therefore they are susceptible to tama. Okay, very good. We figured out how all these materials could possibly be susceptible to tama. The Gemara is going to give an Ika Amri, as we've seen many times. Ika Amri is just a different sequence here to how the conversation went. We wind up with the same conclusion, so don't worry. It's not like we're revising everything. Ika Amri. So now, actually, it's obvious to us initially that if you say chotzelos refers to mats, it's obvious to us how all these different materials for mats are susceptible to tama. The plants, they can be used for covering the vats of beer. These can use as we said before, right? So they're going to be used for spreading over. They're going to be used for the sieving as well, right? How do they? I'm just curious. How do they translate lefarse? Presume not as Persian, right? Levilon, that's what Rashi says. Keneged Pesach, like a.
I think it's a
Basically,
curtain.
it's like curtain, right? So Rashi Levilon, right? So basically, it's a cover like the doorway. It's like a curtain at the doorway. That seems to be what Rashi says. Right, very good, Tony. Levilon Keneged Pesach, Targim Mesach Pesach. Oh, he's referencing in Shemos. Okay, very good. Elalamad Amar Marzubli. I don't know if I've been pronouncing Marzubli right this whole time, but I like my pronunciation, so I'm going to stick with that. Do you have for those with the kudos in their Gemara, have I been pronouncing it wrong this entire time? Like Marzovali maybe or something? Okay, I don't want to make you all work too hard tonight. It's okay.
It looks like Marzoble.
I was close. I like Marzubli better, but okay, Marzovle. So Levanta Amar Marzovle Bishlamash. So if it's referring to some kind of pouch, okay, so these hairs are perfect for making pouches. You're right. You ever see those tefillin bags that they're? It's not just enough that the tefillin comes from the cow, but they even get like the cowhide tefillin bags. In the 5 towns, at least, you see them like the Gvirim like to walk around with those. Shelshav v'shel gemi l'may chazu, but from these plants, what can they possibly make? They can be used for storing fruits. So basically, the point of all this is to say all these materials, whether they're made as bags, whether they're made as mats, they are susceptible to tama and hence cannot be used for schach. Okay, very good. One final point, which is connected to this, and then we'll finish the parak Mirza Hashem. Tanya, Amar Rechanina, Kishirad Hilagoa, when I went down to the diaspora, Matsasi Zakin Echad, I found some elderly person, Va'amarli Misachim Babudia. We use mats to cover our sukkahs. Ushabasi Itza Rabbi Yeshua Achi Abba Hodo Levarav. And so my uncle Rabbi Yeshua, he agreed as well. That's when there's no rim, because if there's a rim, it's a kli. A kli is makabel tuma, which can't be used for schach. So Amar Ula, Hani Bodisa, Dri Mechuza, Ilmale Kir Shalahem Misachmehu. Same idea. If not for the wall going around them, the not lid. What was the word I was using beforehand? The rim. Thank you. The rim. Then they would be good. Taninami Haki, and we have a brisa also, another brisa here that supports this. Misachin Babudya Vinyeshan Kir a Misachin Bahan. If it has a rim, no good. If it doesn't have a rim, green light to use it for your sukkah. Hadran alach sukkah. We shall return to you the first parak of Masechah Sukkah. When we will, well, we have to finish Masechta itself first, before we come back to it sometime. So, okay. Mazel tov, everyone. Now you can take some malt out, take some schnapps, and this is what I remember. I remember talking a lot about my APAC experiences today. For those who are the Thursday, this one is not as unfiltered. So I remember every time when I was in this APAC fellowship for rabbinical students, they would take us, they would wine and dine us. They take us to all these fancy restaurants. I forgot what they're called in the city, but you know the name, La Moray, those things. Went to something of that caliber. And as a rabbinical student who couldn't turn down a good meal, of course I'd make my way out to all these opportunities. And then I remember once COVID hit and they wanted to continue doing all these sessions with us, they're like, all right, you can snuggle up on the couch tonight for a Zoom session, and the foods will be in your fridge. I'm like, what do you mean the food's in my fridge? So anyway, I wish I could provide you with the food, but maybe I don't know, maybe we should have some sort of mini CM. So if you guys want to, as Herzl said, right? Im tirtzu einzu agada. So if you want to make it happen, you have my support. Okay. Jumping into the second parak. Here we go. This is quite a mission. Quite a mission. Hayashin Tachas.
What page are we on?
We are on 20b.
20B. Okay.
20b. Starting chapter 2. Okay. Hayashin Tachas Amita Basukkah. Lo Yatsi Chavaso. This harkens back to conversations we've had earlier in reference to this. That if someone sleeps in a bed, under the sukkah, then they are not yotze because they're under the bed. They're not under the schach. What do you mean? When we were visiting the great sages, we would, I guess everyone was packing into the sukkah. We slept under the bed and they didn't say a thing about it. Presumably, they would have said something if they thought we weren't being yotze our mitzvah. Rabbi Shimon says, well, that's not true, and I'll give you a proof. Maisa betavi avdol sharav Gamliel shayashin tachas hamita, that the servant of Rav Gamliel, Tavi, he would sleep so he's a non-Jewish servant, by the way. That's important. He would sleep under the bed in the sukkah. But Amar lehem Rav Gamliel l'sakanim, and Rav Gamliel said to his colleagues, re'isim Tavi avdi shu Talmud chacham. You see, my servant Tavi, he's a big Talmud Chacham. And he knows that as an Eved, even though he's chayiv in mitzvah seishis man grama, in time-bound mitzvahs, he knows so because it's a time-bound mitzvah, so he's not chayiv in it. Therefore, he sleeps under the bed. And from this we learned, the fact that Tavi slept under the bed is because Tavi was not chayiv in the mitzvah of sukkah. What do I infer from there? For a standard Jewish man who is chayiv in the mitzvah of sukkah, it would not be sufficient to sleep under the bed. They would not be yotzei their mitzvah. By the way, something very interesting. You notice the words in the Mishnah, it says, L'fi darkenu lamanu. And, what does that mean? So if you look at Rashi, it's a good Rashi here. All Rashis are good, but this is especially. L'fi darkenu lamanu. Klomar. Afal pi shel amr lanu l'shem limud. This is interesting because how did they figure out this halacha that you're not supposed to sleep under the sukkah? Rav Gamliel didn't sit down one day and give shir and say that if you sleep under the bed in a sukkah, you're not yotze, you're chiyuv. It just came about through casual conversation. So this is very fascinating. Even though he wasn't giving shir, rather he was just stam schmoozing with them, saying, that's my servant Tavi over there. Casual conversation. Right? He was just like kidding around and everything. Like, you see my servant there? Such a big tzaddik. Shayashing taxamita lo yosei chavaso. But this is what's fascinating, that even like the Sicha Patela, even the Sicha Schulin Shel Talmidei Chachamim, even just, this is something that when you get to listen in to Rosh Yeshiva and Talmidei Chachamim talking to each other, even when they're just making small talk, they're dropping Talmudic references and they're like making references to all these different kinds of Torah ideas just in their casual conversation. There's so much to learn. Though you have to be careful also. I was talking to Eli right I can never pronounce his last name. Reicher. I always think it's Reichner. I always get confused. So I was speaking to Eli and this morning at Minyan, and we were talking about, because I think there was like orange juice or something for like a little bit of collation for your site. So we were talking about this story. We're talking about Ramosha Feinstein a lot tonight. That Ramosha was at I think a bris or some kind of simcha. I guess more of a casual one. There's some orange juice there, and he picks up a bottle. He looks at it and then he puts it back down. And so everyone's like, oh, you see, Ramosha wouldn't drink from that brand of orange juice. It must be there's something wrong with the kashrus of it. So people went over to ask him, and then he had to clarify later that the bottle was just empty. So everyone's like, oh no, this brand is not kosher. Ramosha wouldn't drink from it. And like, the bottle was empty. That's why I picked a different one. So yeah.
Right. So back to the Mishnah. So why is this another Mishnah on this topic of the bed if we had it before? How is it different?
Very good question. So the funny thing is that this Mishnah actually precedes that Gemara that we discussed it. We had Mishnayos also that kind of talk about similar ideas, but when we brought in the reference to sleeping under a bed, I think we actually were, I think we even possibly directly referenced this Mishnah as well. So this is what happens all the time, is that the Gemara is a later conversation, which, so this is like something funny that happens all the time. So the Mishnayos were before the Gemara, but sometimes the Gemara, which is just a record of conversations about Mishnayos, on earlier Mishnayos could actually already refer to later Mishnayos in the Masechta. I guess the good news is that we come in armed with the framework that we already have, hopefully some vague recollection of what we saw in the past in the Gemara. Hopefully it'll help us for the Mishnah. But not to worry, somehow there's still a whole Talmudic Gemara discourse on this Mishnah anyway. Doesn't go on for too long. It's Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, but we still have some robust material. So anyway, if you take a look in Tosfos here, Tosfos elaborates a little bit more. Tosfos actually quotes the Gemara Yerushalmi. If you look at Re'isim Tavi Avdi Shehu Talmud Chacham. So Tosfos says, Eved Kasher Haya K'Isim Parak Shein de Brachos. So you look there, another story which speaks to how he was a very good servant. Ubi Yerushalmi. So I believe that reference in Brachos, if I'm not mistaken, is that I think it's the Mishnah there. That around Gamliel, after Tavi passed away, he actually he received Tanchumen. I don't think it meant he sat a full Shiva necessarily, but he did some form of a Shiva at least, and people would come and they would seek to comfort him. He was bereaved over the loss of his servant. So he really held Tavi in high regard. He wasn't just like another person working around his house. Uber Yerushalmi, Tani, and the Gemara Yerushalmi tells us Shahaya maniach tefillin v'lo michu biyado chachamim, that he would wear tefillin and the rabbis did not object to it. Now, not object is an interesting lashon. It also says that the daughter of Shaul HaMelech wore tefillin and the rabbis didn't object to it either. Now, not objecting to something is not necessarily approving of something either, right? The question is it worth making a fight about it? Yeah, so I could point to a whole host of things that I think ought to improve, but I have to pick my battles. So I don't know why the Chacham didn't necessarily object to it. Uparich, so the Gemara asks there, Mechapa Shitase during Gamliel. So it sounds like the shitas are getting flipped here. Tahacha gabe sukkah michu biyado chachamim milei shiva sukkah sheha yashim tachas amita. Because if you look at our Mishnah here, it looks like the Chachamim were makbid. They dafka wanted Tavi to sleep under the bed, to sleep or to be under the table there. That way he wouldn't be fulfilling the mitzvah of Sukkah. Yet they didn't seem to think it was worth making a fight to get him not to wear tefillin. So why were they not makbid on tefillin, but they were makbid on sukkah? Mashani, and they answered, the answer was that there's only so much room for sleeping bags in the sukkah, and they figured they may as well put the guy who's not chayiv in sukkah in the first place under the table. Uparich, but then the Gemara there asks, if the idea was that he was taking up too much room, why didn't you just tell him to leave the sukkah entirely? So Mishani derotza haylishmoa divrei chachamim, because he wanted to hear the conversations of the chachamim, right? So everyone, they're having their sleep out party in the sukkah, and the chacham are going to tell all sorts of great vartlach on kimlei b'deramine and on and mechitzas and halacha. And Tavi wanted to get in on the conversation, or he wanted to hear the conversation rather. Dara Chaner raised an interesting question, by the way, because generally a guy is not supposed to learn Torah. So they didn't directly teach him anything, but apparently he picked up a lot just by virtue of observing and listening in. From what I
But
hear,
you're not reading from the Gemara here, are you?
that was sorry if I wasn't clear. That was Tosos.
Got it. Thank you. No, you were
Sorry
not.
if I didn't. I don't know if I was explicit about
I
it.
didn't catch that.
It was a Gemara. It was a Gemara in Yerushalmi that Tosos references.
Got it.
Anyway,
Okay.
now we're going to go back into the Gemara. So we're going to start the Gemara right now. Any questions before we go in? Okay, here we go. The Gemara is actually going to have a little bit of a build-up of a question. We're just going to do part one of the build-up, and we'll continue with it next week, because if we go through the entire question and answer, it'll take us all the way through Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph, and we'll stick to our regimen. Okay, so the Gemara says Vahaleka Asara Tirgamashul B'Mita Asara. So the question is that we learned, as Toby said, we've seen this in the past, that in order for the bed to be an issue of interposing between you and the schach, it needs to be considered an independent area. It's only considered its own independent, distinct area if it is 10 tfachim tall. So where in the Mishnah does it say that? Shmuel says, you got to read between the lines. We're talking about a bed that's 10 tfachim tall. And that's why the Tanna Kama says it would be an issue interposing between you and the sukkah. Okay. Now let's just do one more piece. It's not Hassam. So this is a Mishnah, of course, in Ohalos. Here we go. Echad chor shechru mayim o shratzim o shechlu o shratzim o shechlotzim ilachas v'chein ilchafanim. I'll translate everything in one moment. V'chein sevar shel koros mahil al hatoma. So you have all these cases of whether there was a hole dug into something by water, or whether little critters came and ate a hole into stones or pebbles in the ground, whatever it might be, or the ground itself, due to the salty nature of it, a hole occurred in it. That's what Rashi says. Or if there is a gap in a stone structure, in a pile of stones, or a pile of beams. So in all these cases, mahil al hatuma, with all these materials, if there's a gap in there, so then it's considered to be, all these materials serve as an ohel, and I'm sure as we've discussed in the past, that if you have a corpse that's under an ohel, then anything under the ohel also contracts the tuma from that. And Rabbi Huda Omer, kol ol she'ino also be the other ohel. He says only something that's artificial ohel can transfer the tuma, but something that's a naturally occurring ohel, like we just described, would not be an issue of transferring tumas mace. Well, I have a question. What's the basis to distinguish between naturally occurring olos and artificially created ones? So my time to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not my question, it's right here in the Gemara. Yalev ohel mi mishkan. It's a gezerah shava from the Mishkan. Ksiv hacha zos haTorah adam kiyamas ba'ohel. In terms of tumas mace, it uses the word ohel. Uksiv hasam vayifros is ohel al Mishkan. And then in the context of the Mishkan, building the tabernacle, it also talks about an ohel. Ma lahalam bidei adam, avkan bidei adam. Just as the Mishkan was made by man, so too only a tent that is made by man constitutes an ohel. Whereas Rabbanan ohel read, but since ohel is mentioned twice, they say whether it's made artificially, whether it's naturally occurring, it will constitute an ohel. What does this all have to do with our Mishnah? You can already see the themes over here, but God willing, just leave it as an independent idea for now. And God willing, we will pick it up with this next week. Mazel tov, everyone, on completing the first parak together. And God willing, we should finish many more in the coming weeks. All right.
See you Sunday.
See you Sunday, God willing, Zadie. Mazel tov. All right. Good Shabbos. Take care, everyone.
Good Shabbos.
Yeah,
Thank you. Good
Hanukkah.
Shabbos.